Okay, so we're live, but I'm not like actually starting talking to people yet. I
Okay.
want to give people a chance for like, in case anyone wants to show up to
Okay.
talk.
I think
Uh,
Matt said that he's gonna try to listen.
oh, nice.
Hmm.
Yeah, the owl is we call it the business owl. I forget what it was. We had a really important.
Owls are nothing but
Owls are
business.
nothing but business. We had a really important meeting, and in like true Lewis form, I showed up wearing this T-shirt, and afterwards, Kavita, my colleague, was like, "I can't believe you wore that." And I was like, "It's my business owl."
Did she feel like it was
No,
not quite the vibe she was going for?
Well, I try to be appropriate, but she just like was like she really did enjoy it. So I've always wanted to get an owl to keep back here, and I would always wear it into important meetings after that to try to make her laugh. Yeah, hey, we are live and have been live for the last few minutes.
Where's the camera for
The
us?
camera's right there.
Okay.
Yeah, good question.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say hey gamers, even though I just said hey gamers, because I don't do that anymore.
Hello, everyone.
I've been trying to do hi y'all. I'm gonna
Hi,
turn
y'all.
on the stopwatch so that you can keep an eye on it and make sure that you're on the road when you need to.
That's good because I will probably forget once we actually get talking.
Yeah, once we're in the groove.
Yeah.
But I will say, hey y'all, I'm Lewis Weil at Money Positive. We try to go live weekly to talk about financial planning topics and things related to financial planning. I'm here with my good friend, Dr. Roseanne Meissner, who is my friend and writing partner. And we're going to just have a conversation about how it is a weirdly good time to buy a home right now. We're in Austin, Texas, and Roseanne is, I think I can share this, that's why we're doing the episode today, is in the process of looking to buy, her and her family are looking to buy their first home. So, share from her experiences a bit. And maybe inspire some folks who are thinking about a home themselves. Do you want to give yourself any more introduction?
I think that's pretty good.
Well, I'm gonna remember to plug her Substack at the end. But she is an excellent writer and scientist and friend and mom in person. So yeah, it is a weirdly good time to buy a house right now. A lot of people think some people, interest rates are really high right now. So a lot of people think it's kind of a bad time, which is probably true for a lot of people, because as interest rates go up, the mortgage payment one needs to make on a home goes up. But as a consequence of that, there are fewer people trying to buy houses right now, and that is driving down the price of houses in a lot of places. Like, we're in Austin, which is always a very hot market, for lack of a better term, and the prices have gone down and are reaching getting things to a place where they might be approachable for a lot of people when the market was crazy last year. And home prices went up $100,000, things became unaffordable, and all of a sudden in a lot of places prices are not great but getting approachable, whereas they were out of reach before. And so we're seeing with a lot of our clients that ooh, you have to click on it in order to see the chat, y'all. So if someone was chatting, please jump in and say other things again, because we just turned it on. But if you can afford the down payment, and if you can swing having a kind of shitty mortgage for a year or two, it is a uniquely good time to buy a house for a lot of working people in a way that was unapproachable even just a year ago. And I think, would you say it's fair? Was that your experience?
Yeah, so My observation of the market over the past few years is that houses didn't even stay on the market for any real length of time.
I didn't think about that.
So they would be listed, and then people would be bidding against each other. One thing that we heard a lot, which you mentioned actually, is that people would make offers that were above the asking price. People would be paying cash for that. And those were all conditions of the market where Paul's my partner, we just couldn't compete with that. And so we weren't engaged in actively trying to buy a house. We just sat back and lived our life as renters. And now that the conditions of the market have changed, we feel that we can put in an honest effort toward buying, and we'll see how things go.
That's a really good point, and we then come back and talk more about like the process of home buying. But you have to, when you buy a house, you have to put in an offer, and you have to have all your payment information organized going into it, because the seller wants to have it be a really easy sale. So if someone comes in paying cash and offers you over, which I don't know how much people know, a lot of corporate landlords were buying up houses because interest rates were so low. So they were flush with cheap cash and could come in and say, like, you'll have this sale versus selling to a family. Like, they have to, go through all the pre-approval and stuff. And so it's just much more appealing for a seller to sell to someone who's paying cash or equivalent, versus now. That's a really good point, that things are sitting on the market and sellers are more open to buyers that they might not have been open to before. So it's actually a good time for real humans to be out buying. Roseanne very wisely and kindly wrote some notes. So, and I think I'll actually go through them in order, because I think it really tells the story of buying a home and why you would buy a home. And the first one I think is actually like the perfect intro, because this is what I lead with a lot of clients. Is buying your own home a worthwhile investment? Do I think it's worth it? And the answer is yes, with the following context. I do like to encourage the people we work with towards home ownership eventually, if that's something that they're interested in. Nothing says you ever have to be a homeowner, but what I like about it is not the fact that it's going to be a good investment. Which it might very well be. Buying a home is the most common way that working people build their wealth. Like, it is often the most significant asset. It usually represents a large portion of a middle-class family's net worth. So in that regard, odds are good. History has shown that buying a home in America tends to work out for the homeowner. But what I like about buying a home is, for people familiar with our way of budgeting, we like to look at what are the fixed costs. Like, things center around fixed costs. And if we're trying to plan your budget for the next few years, for the next few decades, if you're wanting to become, if you're wanting to quit working, if you're wanting to become self-employed, if you're just wanting to have some predictability, when you buy a home, we now know what your housing costs are going to be going forward. Because if you get a 30-year mortgage, well, that's your mortgage. Obviously, you have to pay to maintain the house and taxes and insurance and stuff, but it now makes it you can plan around it a lot more, versus renting. You rent, when people rent, they end up moving a lot, either by choice or are forced to by their landlord. So I really like to work people to a place where homeownership makes sense for them, both for building equity and not paying rent anymore, but also for just the predictability that comes with owning your own place. And I can imagine that that's also appealing, for a family, with young children, to have some predictability. Let's see. Yeah, do you have anything? Does that resonate in any way? Does that speak to you and Paul's experience? How much does that factor in?
I think that I have long believed that home ownership is a real marker of adulthood.
Whoa.
And, here Paul and I are in our 40s and we're still renting. So I think that there's some amount of, for me, just a belief that this is what grown-ups do. Grown-ups buy their own home. And yet achieving that has been quite difficult for a lot of people in our generation. Lewis and I are both millennials. Mm-hmm. We're about the same age. Yep. So, the belief with which I was raised has come up against the realities of being an adult millennial. So, I think that my hope had been that we would be good candidates to buy a home at some point. But for a long time, it's felt elusive, either because our careers weren't stable enough to justify buying, or there was a point, actually, this is kind of a good anecdote. There was a point in 2018, I was pregnant with our kid, and there was a beautiful home in our neighborhood that was on the market. And I went to look at it, and it was nice enough. Bedrooms were kind of small, sort of a little bit oddly proportioned, but I proposed the idea to Paul that we think about buying this house, and he didn't feel like the risk was appropriate for us, because when you have a baby, and this is like a very real thing to think about, you don't know how the birth is going to go. You don't know how healthy everyone is going to be after the birth. And he just felt like it was a big sort of question mark for us as to what things would look like after the baby was born. And so we didn't buy at that time, even though it may have been like the best time for us to do this. Like, it was a good time in a lot of ways. But I guess my point is that one has to be in the right frame of mind mm-hmm. for the risk that buying a home or trying to buy a home entails, as well as whatever kind of risk factors are in your life at the time, right? Like, yeah. For example, if you're like thinking that you're going to get laid off from your job in the next 6 months, you might not want to take on a mortgage. Like, maybe that feels uncomfortable, Yeah,
that's a really good point. Like, it is a risk, and so there's like being able to afford it today to make the purchase, but then now you have a mortgage and you have to be able to meet it. So I often ask people, like, if they're thinking about it, is like, well, is that the priority for you? Because now you're gonna have to make this mortgage. If you're also wanting to quit and become self-employed or become a digital nomad or something, mm-hmm. Can you continue to meet this obligation? And I can see where Paul's coming from at the time, like the risk around having your first kid and not knowing anything about all the risks that come with early childhood, mm-hmm. Like not wanting to take on that risk, to compound the risk. That said, a lot of times having a kid is what motivates people to buy.
That's true.
Yeah, it's really funny. And so sometimes I'm balancing with people, like, do you want to be going through the process while you're also pregnant? Do you want to be moving while you're carrying around a newborn? And so sometimes, like, if it's early enough, the answer is yes, let's get this out of the way. And other times it's like, let's wait until the kid's walking and can be left with someone so that we can be dealing with it. Because even when it goes well, home buying is terrible process. I don't try to sugarcoat it, and because I want people to know going in that it's hard. Even when it goes well, it's hard. And that's just the buying, much less the moving and the repairs and stuff that come with it. But that's a bit of a tangent. But yeah, like, people buy when they're ready, and and it is definitely a family decision if you're in a couple or more, like, for the household to be ready. And one thing I always remind people of, like, having from our own experience, my partner and I bought our house a while back. I can share from that experience because it was a wild one, and in multiple ways and multiple times. But often it is a bit of a stretch at the time, like, and whether and beating yourself up. I'm not saying that you're doing this, but others, like, beat themselves up, like, oh, why didn't I buy back then? Why didn't I buy this? Why didn't I buy a brownstone in New York in 1984?
Why didn't I time travel?
Live
differently.
Yeah, why didn't I, like, have, like, a career and $100,000 in the bank back then? Sorry, someone in the chat said a mortgage process is compared to a financial colonoscopy. And for a colonoscopy, at least they knock you out and you just wake up later. I haven't done one yet, but I've heard. Maybe it's closer to childbirth.
I was gonna say, at least they didn't compare it to childbirth.
Yeah,
everything gets compared to that.
Hey, I think this is the first time we have people in chat talking to each other. This is nice.
This is so
We've
fun.
reached a Twitch milestone.
Yay!
Yeah, at least for colonoscopy, they knock you out. But a lot of times, and from experience, both personally and helping people, like, it's often a stretch. Like, especially in places like Austin, where you are also competing with, companies who are buying, people moving from New York and California where things are more expensive, so they're coming in with more cash in their pocket because they just sold their house in LA. But that's true in many metros around the country, that in order to get there, it's gonna be a stretch. And when we first bought our house, it was a stretch, and it was uncomfortable at first. There were moments I got laid off twice after we bought the house. And that, that's no fun. And we never were really in danger of, like, not making the mortgage or not being able to pay the house, but you definitely feel like there's that, like, oh my God, we're going to lose the house anxiety once you have a house. Yeah. But when you buy it at that price, and you now have it at that price for the rest of the time you're in the home. So it was a big stretch for us back then. But as you grow, as your careers grow, as you get more stable as humans, it becomes a smaller and smaller part of your life and budget, and it becomes less and less stressful. So here we are now 10 years later, and it's less of a big deal. So what was a stretch at the time becomes not such a big deal later. And I often remind people of that. And also, what I didn't say earlier when we were talking about how it's a weirdly good time to buy. If you get a mortgage at 6%, but you're able to buy a house for $600,000 that was $800,000, a year ago, which, by the way, I know in some places is a comical amount of money. I still think it's a comical amount of money, but that's just the reality in Austin right now. If you can afford that down payment, a 20% down payment on a $600,000 house is much different than a 20% down payment on an $800,000 house.
That's true.
It's $120,000 instead of $160,000. And you don't have to have a 20% down payment. We're not going to dive into every single facet of home buying because we could spend hours and hours talking about it. But just preview, it's nice to do 20% when you can, but often that's not reasonable. But what people need to keep in mind who are buying right now is that you can always refinance later. interest rates will come down eventually. And that's why I said if you can float a kind of shitty mortgage for a year or two, like a 6% mortgage, which by the way, when we bought, it was 5% and that was considered good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's
that was
interesting.
considered good at the time back when we first bought the house. And we have since refinanced 2 times.
It's interesting how perspective on what's good is it's very relative to the time in which things are happening.
Yeah. So 6% is much higher than it was, but it's still not bad compared to when interest rates used to be double digits, like closer. That said, eventually interest rates will come down and you'll refinance, and now your mortgage payment will be much lower. So that's why I say as long as you can float it for until interest rates come back down, which they eventually will, you're in a good place because you can lock in today's prices that are slightly, maybe a little depressed compared to, where they have been historically, and at a higher interest rate than they have been lately. You could end up in a really good position, which in retrospect is what happened to us. We were able to buy because this was like 2009, 2010. There was the economic crisis. I got an inheritance. There was some tax incentives, and all of a sudden we were able to afford a house. That not great circumstances. You don't, the inheritances don't always, it's not, sometimes you'd rather not be getting an inheritance, but I bring it up because that's how a lot of people end up buying. It's actually pretty rare for people to buy just by saving up cash. So if you're like wondering how other people have done it, oftentimes like they have, family members helping them out. They got some unexpected amount of money, and that's why they're able to buy. So if you're like having FOMO because your friends around you are buying, like there might be more to it than you realize. But at the time, like interest rates were kind of high, the market was kind of down. This wasn't like a savvy decision. It was just like the same thing was happening where like, it is like a weirdly good time for us to buy. And we're kind of in similar conditions right now. So we're seeing that, for a handful of clients who are able to have saved or have had an event where they got the money for the down payment, and are at a time in their life where it makes sense, it's a really good time to buy. Let's see if there's any other like questions in the chat or on our own list. Who should try to buy? I think I addressed that a little bit. Like you have to be able to have the down payment. Like I used to be a real hard ass and insist on 20% so that people wouldn't pay private mortgage insurance. But like trying to do that with salary and catching up to 20% is just so unrealistic.
Yeah, and in all honesty, we probably won't have 20% if we are able to buy during this season in which we're looking. But we have a down payment, just not the 20%. We're not going to cross the 20% threshold.
Yeah, if people can have like 10%'s great, 5%'s fine. And one thing to keep in mind, like if you're buying I don't make predictions. I don't know that interest rates will come down. I don't know that home prices will go back up. But historically, they do over time because there's more people and they got to live somewhere. So demand increases. Gen Z's got to live somewhere. Just like what happened with us. Millennials got to live somewhere. So eventually, home prices will likely come back up, and you'll either get to 20% by making payments and reducing the amount you owe on your mortgage, or your home value comes up, and all of a sudden you're at 20%. So it can be a weirdly good time to buy, because if home prices bounce back up in a year or two, all of a sudden you might be at 20% despite having done not aggressively paid it down or anything like there. And then you get your home reappraised, and like you let your lender know like, hey, I think we're at 20% now. Can you check it out and drop the PMI? So people who are in that position, it's a good time. Can you look at potential homes before you begin talking to a bank and borrowing money? I think so. I think it's actually important to do those like play. How long before you got serious about buying a house and talking to realtors and stuff? You were looking at Zillow and Redfin and stuff,
I mean,
right?
we looked in 2018, so, it's 2023 now.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that I was unserious about buying in 2018. Actually, we looked, I'm going to time travel back now. I think that I first looked at a home I looked at 2 homes in 2014. The prices of which were like laughably low compared to what we're looking at now.
Yeah. Try not to dwell on
and
that.
I have long had the intention of buying a home. But like I was alluding to earlier, different factors will make you a better or worse candidate from the bank's perspective. So even though I felt like I was a pretty good candidate in 2014, all things considered, but the bank would have disagreed vehemently because in 2014, my partner was totally self-employed and I had switched to being self-employed as well. So the bank would have been like, absolutely not. And we would have been in the position of just trying to buy with cash probably at that point, which we didn't have enough cash to float buying that year. But so I think the reason that I put that on there is that looking at homes, really looking at homes where you could see yourself living, it's like a form of inspiration. It can kind of like light a little fire under you to really decide, like, is this a year in which I can put in the work toward buying a house? Or is this like not the right time in my life? And I think both of the previous times when I was looking, it just wasn't the right time for us.
Yeah.
For me, I don't really hold a sense of regret about having not bought back in 2014 or 2018, simply because I can see that it wasn't the right time to take on that commitment.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, it is helpful to do that, and it's fun to Roseanne, I still look at listings and I have no intention of moving. It's just fun to see what's out there and
if I can be really honest, it's also kind of horrifying what people will put on Zillow.
Oh, it's wild.
It's like you'll see pictures of like decrepit homes and you're like, how is this being listed?
Yeah,
like, what?
Stage it a little bit.
Yeah, I've been shocked by that. I mean, and there's some really beautiful listings. The other thing that's really funny about Zillow, there was a home not too far from where we are, a big home on a big lot, and like half the pictures on Zillow were just like drone shots of Austin, which Austin's beautiful, right? Austin's a beautiful city, but like, I can look at Austin without buying real estate. Like, I can just visit Austin.
If they have to show you pictures of, like, hey, this is the city where you'll be.
It was very bizarre.
Like, no, show me the house.
Yeah, it was very strange.
What are you not showing me? One thing about Zillow and Redfin, and these are all just pulling information from what's called the MLS, which I think stands for like multi-listing service. I used to know this. I'm sure Matt, my realtor friend, I'm going to give a couple shout outs in a little bit, both to Matt's related to housing. I actually end up using Zillow. Just by default, that's the one I go to, but Redfin's equally good. The MLS is the same thing without the like layer, like the startup-y layer on top of it. I like to use them when I'm looking with people because we can look and see what the local taxes and insurance are like. Those vary a lot greatly, and they're very different in Texas versus the West Coast or East Coast or Florida or the Midwest. So I will often screen share with people and say, like, let's look at the house you are thinking about. Let's play with what would it look like to make a 10% down payment? Could we float that in the budget that we've already made for you? And then what happens when we refinance it later? Because like there's a calculator in there. We can play with it. We can say, what would it be when interest rates are 5% or 4%? And we can make a much more accurate, not precise, but accurate budget using those tools than I could just, guessing and punching in interest rates on my compounding calculator. So I actually really like using those as a tool just for house hunting, for like imagining different places, getting a feel for the market. Because you might pull it up. You might pull up Zillow and be like, oh, I think I could afford that. Like, and it might be more realistic than you realize. I have that happen all the time. So it's fun and it's actually really useful. All right, I think one more thing so that you can get on the road in a second. What is mortgage pre-approval? Why is it important for house hunters? Yeah, very good question. I want to preface that by saying, if you are getting serious, start working with a realtor. Like if you're wanting to go start looking at places, if you think that this is happening in the next year, like a realtor is invaluable. Like that relationship, that experience of being able to, we walked into a house that we wanted to put an offer on. We went in with one realtor. This was the first
Made
house.
Your heart go pitter patter.
The first house we looked at, gorgeous house in a great location. Technically, we could afford it, and we went in with one realtor, and they were just like, "So, gonna buy it?" And we were like, "Yeah, I guess." We had no preparation. We came back to the same house with we found a new realtor. We went back in, and he's like, "Yeah, these countertops are great, but I'm not crazy about the fact that this house is sitting on cinder blocks." Like, they did it. It was pier and beam, and all the piers had fallen away, and they'd replaced them with cinder blocks, which is super illegal and super dangerous.
So it had no foundation.
It had no foundation.
It was just sitting on literal blocks.
But they put in new countertops and were like trying to sell it. And if we had had a bad realtor, which I've had bad realtor experiences, we could have gone through the whole process and bought it, and then the house.
Do you think an inspector would have pointed that out
to
you?
Yeah. So let's walk through this real quick.
That might be getting ahead of things.
Yeah, no, they would have, but you are going into it naive. You only are going to buy a handful of houses in your lifetime. A realtor buys and sells houses all day, every day. They've done hundreds, thousands of houses. They've seen all sorts of shit. So like you don't even waste your time. It probably would have been caught in the inspection, and that probably would have given us pause. But at that point, so all right, you get a realtor. And I like realtors not just because, like, for people who are doing it for the first time, having just the guidance, but also they've got relationships with mortgage brokers, so they can help you find mortgage brokers. They have relationships with inspectors, so they can help you get an inspector. So what happens is you decide you want to buy a house. Then I really think, like, if you're serious developing a relationship with a realtor, they know that it might be a while before you buy a house, but they also want to be there for you and answer. A good one wants to be there, answer your questions, and be there for when you are ready. You start looking, and then that's when you want to start thinking about getting pre-approved. So pre-approved means you pour your life out in front of a mortgage broker, of someone who guarantees, then says yes, this person is going to be able to make their payments, and we are willing to lend them hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they can go buy this house. I alluded to you when y'all were having a struggle about a struggle that I had that I didn't want to dump on you at the time. But
I'm ready to.
Yeah, this is a good time, and why it's important to take it seriously and be working with someone who gives you good guidance. Like, this was before I was a planner, naive kiddo. I thought, I'm always getting letters like, you're pre-approved for a car loan, you're pre-approved for a credit card. So I was like, and our realtor kept saying, y'all need to get pre-approved, y'all need to get pre-approved. And no joke, this is embarrassing to admit, but I thought we would walk into our bank, get pre-approved that afternoon, and then go buy a house. So I'd been putting it off, thinking it wasn't going to be a big deal.
Sweet young Lewis.
Oh, sweet young Lewis.
So
unlike, seasoned but still quite young and vigorous Lewis.
Unlike old and wizened Roseanne over here.
And so yeah, like getting pre-approved is what lets you put in an offer. Like you can put in an offer and they can accept it, but then they're going to want to see like, hey, are you pre-approved? The seller is going to want to see that.
Right.
To like make sure like, hey, can these people actually pay the thing that they're putting into an offer for? And we got turned down, and it was because of my credit. And I was devastated. It was humiliating. I felt like I fucked it up for Ray and I, and it ended up turning out for the best because then we didn't move on that house. This was a separate house.
Right. This sounds like it was well before
it was
the
a
process
mini
of buying your
month.
current house.
It was a mini month process.
Yeah.
We must have looked at 100 houses. Our realtor was ready to be done with us, but he put up with it. But in the process, we learned like, hey, we don't actually want that house. We just liked that house because it was cute and in an interesting location, and it made us step back and think, what do we want in a house? And we started looking in places that we weren't considering before, at types of homes we weren't considering before, and we found the house that we are still into this day and love a lot. And I worked on my credit, and I got we got pre-approved, so that we could go in ready to buy. And so that's why it's so important, because you need to go in like, well, you want to be well positioned so that you can move quickly, so that a seller wants to sell to you. Because no matter what, there's always going to be other people buying. And so you want to be on paper as nice as you can be. And, you and I have talked a bit about like a lot of the pre-approval process is making yourself look nice on paper, which is, again, why it's good to work with a mortgage broker and a realtor, because they can help you understand what you need to do to look good on paper.
You would think that as a writer, I would appreciate the art of wanting to look good on a paper, but there are sacrifices that you make in order to look good on paper for some of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that surprised me about the process, that there are likely decisions we will make now to please the bank that we would not make otherwise.
And you only are doing it for this time.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important. As I was alluding to, I want to give a shout out to my friend Matt Whitty at Spyglass. I think he's in the chat, and he is a longtime friend, but also my go-to for all real estate questions and who I send people to in the Austin area. He's a good dude who will put up with you while you wishy-washy look at stuff and naively look at houses. He's there to help. I also work a lot with Matthew Breston at Iron Harbor. He is a mortgage agent or broker. Sorry, I don't remember which one, Matthew. And he helps people find the best mortgages. And I'm sure Matt Whitty has people that he likes to work with too. But it's important to have these relationships because it is the single largest purchase you will make. It is one of the most important steps in your life. It does make you feel very adult.
It's mind-boggling the numbers involved in home buying. It's
wild.
It's
surreal.
Very strange.
Yeah.
Very strange.
And even when it goes well, it's still tough, which is why it's so important to have good partners to help guide you through the process. And what I always remind, and I'm saying this to you too in the moment, is like, it will be over. You will have a house. You will get to a place where you're just like, oh, this is our home. I don't need to I don't need to fill out papers anymore. I don't need to pour like you feel like you're pouring your value as a person out into your mortgage application. But it will be over. The move will be over, and then it's done, and you have a home, and it's wonderful. I can say that from personal and professional experience. I'm
very much a one step at a time kind of person.
There you go.
So I haven't found it too difficult to just stay focused on what the next step is for us. That next step might be unpleasant, but
one step at a time.
Yeah, I think having having a team of people who can guide us and say, this is the next step for you, that helps me to stay focused on what I can do in the process.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
I have a Substack where I write about things like beauty and style, especially for the average mom. And it's called Ordinary Beauty.
I love that name, by the way.
Thank you. The URL is probably something like ordinarybeauty.substack.com, something along those lines. I should have been more prepared for this plug.
Yeah.
I feel like I missed.
Oh, I always forget. Oh,
and it's
plugs.
I just want to say one more thing. So far it is a Substack. Some of you might be familiar with Substack as a sort of paid subscription format. So far all of my content is free to be read in full. So
nice.
Come find me over there. I'd love to have a bigger audience. That'd be great.
Yeah, and we'll definitely come back. There's lots to talk about. She just wrote a really wonderful thing about budgeting and beauty, and we should probably have you come back and talk about that soon.
I would love that.
Actually, that's a really good idea. We should do that in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, let's do it. That'd be fun.
And so you can find me and our co-op at moneypositive.com, Lewis, Lewis, at moneypositive.com. Always happy to answer any questions and help people, be one of those partners helping people as they buy a home. Please reach out with any questions. Thanks. Stay money positive.
Bye, y'all.
Where's the button? Where's my mouse? I'm touching the wrong mouse pad. Pretend we had a much better sign off.
This is our B-roll.
Bye, y'all.